Good morning. I now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 16 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on January 20th, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of marine cargo container spills. We'll move in camera for the last 30 minutes to discuss drafting instructions for a particular report, not this one. The meeting is taking place, of course, in a hybrid format. Pursuant to House Order of November 25th, 2021. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. Please inform me immediately if interpretation is lost, and we'll ensure it is restored before resuming. As per Director for the Board on March 10, 2022, all those attending, okay, that's that. I'll get to introduce our witnesses now, of course. From the Government of British Columbia, we have Mr. Kevin Butterworth, Executive Director, Environmental Emergencies and Land Remediation, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. That's a lot of letters at the end of your name. Shipping Federation of Canada, we have Christopher Hall, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique, we have Valérie Langlois, Professor and Canada Research Chair in Ecotoxicogenomics and Endocrine Disruption. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Before I start, I want to welcome somebody back to committee today, of course, which is my assistant who did work in Ontario and now works in Newfoundland, but she's in Ottawa for a few days, and that's Vanessa, who most people here at this committee will remember Vanessa. So now we'll go to Mr. Hall for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Chris Hall, and I'm the President and CEO of the Shipping Federation of Canada. Our organization was founded in 1903 through an act of Parliament with the purpose to act as a national association that represents the owners, operators, and agents of ocean ships that carry Canada's imports and exports to and from world markets. These ships, which are all ocean-going and foreign flagged, carry virtually all of Canada's international seaborne trade, and therefore play an essential role in connecting Canada's importers and exporters to the world. By way of background on myself, I served in the Canadian Coast Guard for several years before moving to the commercial sector, where I was engaged in deep-sea salvage towing, the offshore oil and gas sector, and the harbor towing services. Prior to my recent appointment at the Shipping Federation, I held an executive position at a key Canadian port authority. The first point that I wish to make is in respect to the Hazardous and Noxious Substances Convention, the HNS Convention for short. The Federation would assert that the HNS Convention should be the sole mechanism for establishing liability for container spills involving such materials. Much like the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage has proven to be a successful mechanism for holding the polluter liable for oil spills, so too will the HNS Convention create the same level of effectiveness for a spill of an HNS nature. This convention will greatly improve the responsibility and accountability of the polluter. To contemplate charging additional fees on the cargo or to the carriers would be both counterproductive and detrimental to Canada's competitiveness and would undermine the intent of the HNS Convention itself. I would now like to turn my comments to Canada's Marine Emergency Management regime. The Federation would like to acknowledge and commend the level of commitment from both Transport Canada and the Coast Guard in responding to environmental incidents in Canadian waters. That being said, I believe there is an opportunity to improve the effectiveness of our regime by making it more proactive rather than reactive. In 2014, the federal government's Tanker Safety Expert Panel concluded a review of Canada's ship source pollution and response regime, which included hazardous and noxious substances. Chapter 3 of that report notes that the management of marine casualties is a complicated undertaking in Canada due to the multiple levels of government that are involved. In some cases, there are overlapping jurisdictions that cause delays and often confusion. As an example, Transport Canada is the lead agency regarding assigning a place of refuge for a vessel, Yet the Canada Marine Act grants similar powers to Canadian port authorities. This creates an opportunity for conflict between agencies and delays in decision-making. The essence of the report's recommendation is that timely decision-making can minimize marine spills or prevent them before they occur. In order to achieve this, Canada should model its regime on what has been in place in the UK and Australia for many years. Those regimes provide for a position known as the Secretary of State's Representative for Salvage and Intervention, or SOSREP for short. This position is tasked with acting in the public's best interest and has a range of powers that are designed to mitigate environmental impact through the use of timely decision-making and early intervention. Unfortunately, this portion of the expert panel's recommendations were never implemented in Canada. We believe that the recent container spill on our west coast could have been positively influenced under such a system, given the observations made by the ship's charterer that it was unclear who was in charge and who was coordinating response efforts. The fact that neither Transport Canada nor a Coast Guard have had full and complete jurisdictional control over the evolving emergency created inefficient communications, possible delays in decision-making, and left the master of the ship being relatively unsupported. The Federation urges the federal government to revisit Chapter 3 of the Tanker Safety Expert Panel with a view to adopting its recommendations. Such action would greatly improve the timeliness and effectiveness of Canada's response to an evolving marine incident and create a more proactive system overall. It would also address the jurisdictional gaps that currently exist between Transport Canada and the Coast Guard. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Langlois for 5 minutes or less, please.
Bonjour. Hello, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I hold a Canada Research Chair in Ecotoxicogenomics, and my research focuses on the impacts of environmental contaminants on wildlife health. As the environmental impacts of container spills vary in importance, depending on the nature of the contents of the spilled containers, I will present two cases. First, I will discuss oil spills associated with cargo ships and containers, and secondly, plastic spills. First table, accidental situations that could cause an oil spill from a container are not negligible. Toxicity to the ecosystem will vary depending on the nature of the petroleum products transported. Many chemicals in petroleum products are highly toxic to aquatic species. Recent data produced by my research team has shown, among other things, that the toxicity of oil is similar in cold and warmed waters. Corexit, which is often used as a dispersant during oil spills, is very toxic for living organisms if it is not quickly mixed with the spilled oil products. Petroleum products are one example among thousands of other transported chemicals that can be toxic to ecosystems, as toxic to ecosystems such as pesticides and drugs and medications. Second table, our daily use of plastic-based products has direct consequences on the health of animal species. The more we consume, the more we produce, and the more we transport. For example, recyclable materials in Canada or consumer goods made of plastic are often transported by cargo ship. And if the containers spill, large pieces of plastic can choke wildlife, including many endangered whales and turtles. In addition, lost plastic containers will contaminate the marine ecosystem for a long period of time due to the high persistence of plastic in the environment. When plastics degrade, they form billions of fragments of microplastics and nanoplastics. known to be even more toxic to living organisms. For example, we know that nanoplastics have an impact on the reproduction and metabolism of Canadian oysters. Among the recent discoveries published by my research group, we find that nanoplastics also have the property to accumulate on their surface various contaminants found in the environment. They can thus be vectors and a source of additional contamination for aquatic organisms. Considering the too many permutations of possible contaminants ending up in the environment following a container spill, and considering the wide variety of ecosystems at risk of spills, each harboring a different biodiversity, my recommendations are as follows. 1. Redesign the containers to improve their water tightness and to be equipped with a buoyancy, traceability, and labeling system to ensure their prioritization for recovery and remediation. 2. Develop mathematical models to better understand the movement of dumped containers and their contents. And finally, develop regulations requiring ocean carriers and shippers to implement an effective system to recover containers and their contents and to be liable for the costs associated with environmental decontamination. It is now time to adopt not only an action plan in case of container spills, but also a proactive vision aimed at reducing the transport of non-essential goods by container. This will result in a reduction in the transport of cargo and will reduce the risk of toxic contaminants being released into our ecosystems. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll now go to Mr. Butterworth for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thanks. Thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before the panel as a witness on the study on marine cargo spills. As you know, BC's coastline is one of the most biologically diverse and productive marine environments. Our government is committed to protecting the provincial resources from the impact of marine spills. And while there's regulating spill preparedness from marine vessels is primarily a federal responsibility, our ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, is the lead provincial coordinating agency in the event of an oil or other hazardous spill that might be impacting provincial interests. As such, when a marine spill impacts or threatens the BC coastline, we collaborate very closely with the federal government, Indigenous nations, and the spiller in unified command under a federal lead there to coordinate effective response to spill incidents. And often we'll lead or support the environmental unit, which is responsible for assessing the environmental conditions or the impacts that are related to an incident, and then also develop strategies to minimize those impacts. We've been very encouraged here in BC to see the various ocean protection plan initiatives, investments that have been implemented to protect our coast. In particular, we view the collaboration between the federal and provincial government and coastal First Nations through the North Shelf Bioregion Response Planning Framework as a significant step down the path to reconciliation. Environment is also encouraged to have worked closely with the federal government in response to the recent Zim Kingston cargo container spill off the coast of Vancouver Island. However, we do think that more can be done about funding Indigenous nations and a bit of clarity on the cost recovery provisions, development of a federal recovery requirements, towing capacity, and marine geographic response plans. In conclusion, given the significant impacts of shipping and navigation on the BC's coastal communities, local, Indigenous, and provincial authorities should continue to be consulted on any actions or changes to the federal marine response framework. And we look forward to continuing to work with our response partners to ensure that BC's interests in public safety and the protection of the environment are addressed. And I'm happy to answer any questions or address any concerns that come from your side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Butterworth. We'll now go to our rounds of questioning. We'll start off, of course, with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less. And I will remind members, when you're asking questions, if you could identify which witness you would like to answer instead of having everybody like a deer staring into the headlights. You're losing time by doing it that way. So if you could identify who the question is for, it'd be great. Mr. Arnold, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. I'll start off with Mr. Butterworth, if I could, please. When was the government of BC first informed that the Zim Kingston was in trouble?
Thank you for that question. I was just unmuting there. I don't have that exact date with me, but I can certainly find that and make sure we submit that to you if you're looking for a timeline on how that all fits together, if that is helpful for you.
Thank you. Was the provincial or federal government, was it provincial or federal government personnel who arrived first at the scene?
Again, I don't have that information with me.
If you could provide,
but I'm just writing those down. Yeah.
Thank you. And when did government personnel first arrive at the Zim Kingston?
Just copying those down. I will make sure we get those answers to you.
Thank you. According to the BC government website, on October 21st, the Zim Kingston advised Marine Communications and Traffic Services that rough weather had caused the ship to release cargo. I think the term release raises the question whether the release of containers was intentional or not. Do you know if it was intentional?
I do not, and I certainly haven't heard that interpretation of the wording in from the website before, so that is interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On October 23rd, 2 days after the Zim Kingston initially reported their problems, the vessel reported that damaged containers on board had caught fire. Can you tell the committee what was being done by the vessel's crew or the federal or provincial personnel to prevent the escalation of such containers and chemicals catching fire during the 2 days between October 21st and 23rd?
I think a lot of these questions would be better put towards the unified command to the federal authorities that were in charge of that. As I said earlier, we are in a supporting role on that, and they would have those answers to your fingertips. Yeah.
As the provincial body responsible for environmental situations, do you know how much of that the Danos Corporation has paid for cleanup related to the accident?
I do not know. Would you like me to look into that for you?
If you could, please. Yeah. And are the federal or provincial governments holding any additional funds for the ongoing cleanup?
Not to the best of my knowledge on a provincial side. We do have ongoing works along the cleanup areas, which do take some of those into account. Give me 1 second to look at my notes here.
Okay. Perhaps you can provide that. I'll move on to questions to Ms. Langlois, if I could. Ms. Langlois, 2 containers contain tons of potassium amyl xanthanate and thiourea dioxide. I believe I pronounced those somewhat correctly. And they're missing somewhere off the shores of Vancouver Island. Do you think that the volumes of these chemicals in those containers poses a risk to aquatic wildlife and their habitat?
Well, this is a very good question. Thanks. Well, I'm not aware of this special example, so I would need to have how long those containers have been in the water, where exactly they are, and the volume. And are they broken, those containers? I would need more information, but I'm not sure of the list of chemical you said. Did you say dioxin?
These are
was it
potassium amyl xanthate and thiourea dioxide.
Okay.
And apparently they are self-combustible when contacted with moisture. And there were 57,000 tons, I believe, or 57 tons on board in 4 different containers. Only 2 have been recovered.
Okay. Well, I would say that for sure there is a risk for the ecosystem, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Hall, if I could, you mentioned the the recommendations that the panel report recommendations have not been adapted. If you could provide the committee, I'm probably going to run out of my time, but if you could provide the committee with the recommendations that have not been adopted or adapted by Canada. And in the time that we have remaining, you mentioned there are jurisdictional gaps between Canadian Coast Guard and Transport Canada in these responses. Could you elaborate a little further on that, please?
Sure. Thank you for the question. In terms of the expert panel's report that was submitted in, I believe it was September of 2014, it's only Chapter 3, to the best of my knowledge, that was not that has not been adopted. Other recommendations certainly have, and have helped form the basis of the excellent response regime that we do have in Canada. And I emphasize the word response because that is what it's all built on. It's built on responding to an incident after it occurs, after there is oil in the water or after there is other forms of pollutants in the water.
You had mentioned jurisdictional gaps. Could you elaborate?
Sure. So in Canada, we have, as you know, Transport Canada as a very significant marine agency, and we have DFO/Canadian Coast Guard as another. But there is no one maritime authority in Canada. We have two, and we have other federal departments that have involvement over a marine incident. So the point that there are jurisdictional gaps is that Coast Guard have their mandate and specifically work within that. Transport Canada have their mandate, and there are differences, and there are I'll say perhaps suggest disconnections between the two. There's no single entity that is overall in charge in a marine emergency.
Mr. Arnold, we'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for being here. The more we dive into this, the more it starts to look like this is an issue that Transport Canada would need to do the deeper dive in. The Canadian Coast Guard, of course, is there after something happens, but a lot of the questions that we've been trying to ask are things that we need to know about before or to prevent an incident from taking place. Mr. Hall, marine insurers, do they have absolute liability when an incident like the loss of containers took place?
To the best of my knowledge, yes. Through the Oil Spill Convention, they have a liability that must cover the cost of cleanup and other items.
And is there a standard coverage limit that applies to vessels?
I believe there is. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but I do believe there is a limit of liability, but it is staged. So there's what's called a tier 1, and that is the limit of liability for the vessel owner itself. And then there is a tier 2, and at tier 2, the Ship Source Oil Pollution Fund would kick in for additional funds. At least that's my understanding of the regime.
I would be interested to know, in any event, what kind of dollars are available to assist with cleanup. Is there any way you can provide that information to us offline?
Absolutely. It's in the order of hundreds of millions, but I will determine that number and submit that in writing.
Okay. I imagine reinsurance is in there as well. Conventions for loading containers. We've been trying to find out if there's rules for where a potentially combustible material is loaded in a stack of containers on a ship, and if there are rules that would have the ones most at risk of loss contain the least noxious elements that that shouldn't be in the water. Are you aware? Do those rules exist?
Rules do exist, very detailed rules. Actually, it's called the IMDG code. It's put out through the IMO, and Canada subscribes to that document. It's called the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, and within it documents every single hazardous substance with a UN number, and then has specific stowage requirements for that cargo, and as it relates to the quantity, how it is to be packaged, what it is allowed to be stored against or not allowed to be stored adjacent to, and all of the relative positions as to where it should be in a ship.
What's the relationship between the Shipping Federation and Transport Canada? And by relationship, I mean, do you talk? Do you trade ideas? Are there rubs or gaps, in your opinion?
No, actually, I would say that we have an excellent working relationship with all levels of Transport Canada, from the minister right down through the various departments. We've had a long-standing, very, very solid relationship with Transport Canada. Very, very good working relationship.
Do you find that there are conflicts between, if you like, the economic and commercial realities of shippers versus what advocates and maybe regulators are pushing for in terms of improved safety measures for the mariners, the vessels themselves, and the environment?
I haven't seen any direct evidence of conflicts like that. No, I'm afraid I can't say so.
All right. Mr. Butterworth, in the time I have left, can you comment on what you know about the coordination of efforts to do cleanup along beaches? We get the sense that there's a lot of very well-meaning organizations, but we're not sure if they're coordinated or if they're tripping over each other or if gaps exist in terms of the efforts to make the cleanup happen.
Yes, thank you. So since April 28, 2021, we announced $9.5 million for our Clean Coast, Clean Waters initiatives, specifically to tackle shoreline cleanup. And it also includes derelict vessel removal from the North Coast down to southern Vancouver Island. And then we've also distributed funding, $2 million to the Songhees Development Corporation. It's an Indigenous group here in the south of Vancouver Island. $7 million to the Ship Tour Operators Association. The Wilderness Tourism Association got $3.5 million in 2020, $3.5 in 21, and $2.5 million to the Coastal Restoration Society, and approximately $1.5 million to the Ocean Legacy Foundation.
I appreciate that level of support, but the nature of the question, are they coordinated? Like, are
Yes.
they actually working in concert with, sort of one brain and a lot of activity?
They are, but this is after the fact. So that is the key piece to this. This is cleaning up stuff that is up and down the coast. This is not part of the unified command, which I think the best way to look at that is part of the response efforts when they do that first response and the first cleanup. So that is still done with the federal lead, with all the other agencies in support. This is further down the line in the recovery area, which is around pulling all the stuff that's left together, and it picks up other pieces that are on around the coastline.
Good. Thank you.
Does that help with your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. It's always very interesting to hear you speak. Mrs. Langlois, I very much appreciated the passage where you were talking about the care that Canada has to have, especially DFO, that we have to make sure that there is proper labeling and traceability with regards to transportation of hazardous goods. Could you speak to this? Have you explored in a more detailed fashion this particular subject? Answer. This is not my field of expertise. I am an expert in ecotoxicogenomics, but when we look at consumer goods, it's important to have correct labeling to be able to rapidly respond in case of spillage of this cargo. So there is a type of follow-up of these containers, but oftentimes, in order to quickly respond and to prioritize, it would be important, especially given that there is the provincial, the federal governments, and the private sector that try to respond quickly. And so in the end, we have to be able to respond quickly, and simple and efficient labeling could be useful. Regardless of the cargo, there will be an impact on the environment. if it is left in the water and the marine environment for a long period of time. Of course, some are more toxic than others. So in the same train of thought, when we look at containers with truly hazardous materials, I think that, well, do you think that flotation is possible? Well, of course, there's always a cost. It can cost millions. But is this even possible over the shorter term? Well, from what I understand, materials already known to be toxic and that are in containers, in sealed containers, to protect, of course, the workers. Well, this does not take into account medication or pesticides that are not in those categories. But if are spilled into the environment, there will be consequences. So we have to think not only about toxic materials, but we also have to broaden our thinking around this. Some consumer goods, even all the recycled materials that are transported, if this is found in the marine environment, it might not be as high a priority as toxic materials, as a toxic liquid that will be spilled into the marine environment, but it will, of course, have an impact over the medium or longer term. Should we be classifying the level of the hazardous level, and this way we would be able to anticipate further? Well, that could be possible. We should ask the witnesses who have this expertise. It could be possible in order to anticipate this type of transportation. We do have a plan for recovering. So here we're talking about planning, anticipation, and modeling before an environment impact. So research could be done right now with regards to modeling of impacts, whether it be liquids in containers or toxic materials, how this mixes with the water. So there are different types of modeling that are possible, and many researchers at the INRS, for example, were able to do this type of research in order to foresee what would happen in the case of an eventual spill. Do you feel that you're being listened to, that you have enough budget, or are you being listened to by the concerned departments? Well, I think that the research budgets are always lackluster, so I'm going to say no. But of course, we can never be too informed. It's important to have very good systems in place to respond to eventual spills. There are so many different permutations possible. So it really depends where this would happen. So we have to do many, many studies before being able to react. Earlier on, we were talking about different containers in BC. Well, it would have been important to find out what happens when they're in the water. So the concentration makes a difference. So it's important to have data to be able to model all this information.
Debienne, your 6 minutes are up. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
I'm going to press this. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our witnesses who are here today. I really appreciate the emphasis that's been placed on the prevention and on protecting our coast. That came up over and over again. Some questions that I have. A question from Mr. Butterworth. If you could speak a little bit, I know that the BC government has done quite a bit of work and has placed it has been a focus of protecting our coasts. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the funding that has been initiated, the gaps that you've been seeing along the way. How can we work better alongside you as federal partners? We're hearing a lot about the importance of an integrated response plan, and of course, working alongside the provincial government is a key piece in that. So I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit to what you've been doing and how we can work better together to have an integrated response plan, or the government can work better with you to integrate it. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, happy to do so. We're very keen on developing coordinated all hazard response plans that address hazardous substances, oil and other hazardous substances. There is a big need. I think that's one of the things that the Zim Kingston has shown us, is that there is a big need for an all hazard response plan to address more than just marine oil spills. And there are, if you have a look at certified response organizations such as the Western Canada Marine Response Corporation, they're only required to demonstrate preparedness and respond to oil pollution incidents. So there is definitely a gap in that area. Another piece that you may be interested in, which also fits from some of the earlier questions, is geographic response plans. It's something that we're very keen on here in BC, and we do it on the land base, and we're looking to work to move that into regulation at some point in the future. And basically what you do is you end up putting together a plan on how you respond, which is very specific to an area. And so it's working with the local Indigenous groups, the local authorities, to develop these geographic response plans. And in this instance, in the marine environment, it could quite easily be led by the federal government, but then working with those different groups that have their different levels of jurisdiction to develop plans specific to each region, which would allow folks to be able to respond in a very efficient manner. Another piece that you might be interested in is the possibility of long-term funding to Indigenous groups and local authorities to also increase their spill planning and response capacity. Staff, planning, training, equipment, etc. It all comes down to that, being well prepared and being able to prevent things if possible, and then also to having a fast response. A key piece to this is also making sure that information is open and transparent. So just a reminder that the funding attached to the Ocean Protection Plan does end in 2023. And we'd be very keen if the federal government were to develop a long-term funding strategy to ensure the protection of the coastline and waterways beyond that. So an example of one of the questions that will need to be addressed at that point is, how will emergency tow tugs be funded in the future? And there's also a guarantee of compensation and loss of use, and some clarity from the federal government on its enhanced cost recovery provisions and environmental cost recovery framework. And how will we be able to guarantee access to communities and to the province for fair and timely access to the funds? And will we be able to work closely with the federal government in the development of their policy to make sure we can get the policy aligned with the BC's provincial regime? So, how can we work more closely on those things?
Thank you, Mr.
I'll stop there.
That's very helpful information. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask my next question to Madame Langlois. Thank you for all of your thoughts and of course, your sharing your knowledge around the importance of getting the plastics out of our waters and the impacts that these containers are having in polluting our waters. One of my NDP colleagues, Gord Johns, put forward a motion 151, to address ocean plastics in the past. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on your work and understanding of the impacts of these containers being left in our oceans and the plastics and the debris from these containers being left afloat in our waters and, of course, washing up on our shores.
Thanks for the question. Well, a bit like you just said as an introduction, any broken container containing plastic will obviously come to the surface and float most likely and contribute to the already increasing plastic pollution. One issue with the plastic, it's such a nice, very nice thing because it's so persistent, right? But that's also the problem with this. It's something that doesn't degrade. It doesn't degrade. So when they float, the UV light will destroy a bit the molecules and start degrading. But even though we don't see it or we think it's degrading, then it's just changing form because then it's becoming like microplastic. So it's still there, but you don't just see it with your the naked eye, right? But then the smallest it gets, then other type of damage it's contributing to. So plastic, it's one of the threat of the planet at the moment because like that was such a brilliant invention, but now we're stick with it. We're finding it in our lungs and it stays there, right? So it's sticking everywhere. It doesn't go away. So all of us with the plastic mug, which I don't. Okay, but anyway, just think about the plastic we'll be releasing after that.
Thank
right?
you, Madame
So,
Langlois. Thank you. I apologize to cut you off. I so appreciate the information and you're spreading education and awareness around the impacts that these plastics are having on us. Clearly, we need to have some strong prevention in place to keep these plastics from floating and ending up in our systems in so many different ways. I'm just going to move on.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. You're well
we
over
go.
the 6-minute allotment. We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to our witnesses. My questions will be directed at Chris Hall. Chris, I just was looking at your resume, and it's quite extensive with experience in the Coast Guard and port authorities and different things like that. So, maybe I'll start with a bit of a preamble. As somebody from British Columbia and close to the angling community there, we're very concerned about any contaminants getting into the water that would affect fish and wildlife. But that said, we had to witness on Tuesday. Maybe we could can we get Chris pulled up on the screen? Okay, I'll keep going. Sorry, Chris, I just wanted to be looking at you when I was talking to you. But we talked to the industry rep and said that the incidence of container loss are actually very low. They're below 0.001% of all containers shipped. So, but that said, if one container goes overboard and it's got some contaminated or has contaminants inside and they get out, that's a big deal. But I wanted to ask you specifically, Chris, because with your experience in the shipping industry, what do you think needs to be done? More that can be, on the preventative side. And I was just talking with my colleague Mel Arnold's, just about potential future. Something is in a hazardous state. It can be in a container, perhaps that has floats. So we've all used those life jackets. When you hit the water, it inflates. So. Perhaps there's technology that hasn't been developed yet for some of these more hazardous containers. But also looking at the container recovery project in Australia, where they have some really neat gear and they're recovering containers that go overboard. So is it a lack of infrastructure that we need? Is it, maybe some recommendations, Chris, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And it is a great one. So I firmly believe that the technical problem of losing containers overboard will be overcome. Make no mistake, industry don't want loss of containers any more than a private citizen, any one of us on this call. It's not acceptable. The status quo is not acceptable. Whether the root cause is ship design, ship size, container design, securing methods, whatever the root cause is or the combination, that problem will be solved. These problems or similar problems have existed throughout time, and a solution can be found. Yes, it will take some time. Yes, it will take some coordination amongst the international agencies that are involved, and it will take some money, but it will get solved, and it has to get solved because the loss of containers is not acceptable. the financial impact or the economic impact with that lost cargo is not to minimize the environmental side of it, but it's just as great. The insurance claims and the impact to the shippers and the cargo owners is equally as catastrophic on an economic standpoint as it is on an environmental front. So a solution does need to be found. Tracking of containers, flotation devices, all of those things I'm sure will be considered by the relevant technical bodies in how they come up with
maybe
a solution.
maybe I'll ask you, Chris, further to that question. You know, again, was just speaking with a colleague back in the day. We all grew up with cars without airbags, and we all wondered how they'd actually fit those airbags, how they would make them work. Would it change cars forever, and maybe perhaps in a negative way? But they found a way, and now every vehicle has it. I mean, I've experienced it's saved me from injury in one incident. But I see but there's still tow trucks that are necessary along the highway, right? So we have this proactive thing that we can do. So I will ask you, what is the industry doing? You said we'll find a way, but what is the industry currently doing that you know of to deal with, I guess, firstly, that containers don't fall off or don't, fall off, I guess, the ship. And on the other aspect of it, being with your Coast Guard experience and your Coast Guard hat, what is being done to advance? Do we need a ship in major ports in Canada that can recover containers specifically, that can go out and address these concerns like a fire truck, go and deal with that quickly so we don't have containers in the ocean for long periods of time? So maybe if you can speak to both of those, if you know.
Sure, I'll take the second part first, if I may. So from a cleanup standpoint, I'm sure more can be done. Having dedicated vessels to recover containers, that could work. And we need to remember that unless there is a flotation device or the contents of the container are such that it remains buoyant, the chances of finding it in the early days are very, very remote, considering the vastness of the oceans and the limited amount of time that it may stay on the surface makes finding it difficult, but it could be found after the fact. That is something that could be looked at. I wouldn't have any more comment than that. But on the proactive side, I think I would like to go back to my comments in my opening statements, and that it's that early intervention is what is so key in any marine emergency, whether we're talking containers being lost overboard, a fire on board, or the ship in peril of capsizing due to taking on water for whatever reason. All of these things can be managed better by taking a more proactive response and not waiting for the ship to declare an emergency and it abandons, or wait until there's oil in the water.
Right.
If we had that single entity that could take charge at the earliest hour and make recommendations and have that overriding jurisdiction, so that the right decision is made to prevent that release of the pollutant and saving of life.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. A question to Mr. Hall. Let's follow up on Mr. Zimmer's questioning. So I take it there's no specialized vessels currently in design that can retrieve lost containers?
I thank you for the question. I wouldn't quite go that far. Are there any that were specifically designed for containers, recovery containers specifically? I'm not aware of any, but are there vessels that have specialized equipment that could do so? Yes, I believe there is.
Okay. Just curiosity, when incidents of lost containers, because some of the testimony was given, does it occur closer to the cargo, to the container ship reaching its port of destination, or on the open sea, or is it everywhere? It appears that a lot of cases it's been as they've been reaching the destination. Is there any statistics on that?
If there are, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of any, but I would speculate that loss could be anywhere.
Could be anywhere.
And it could be anywhere.
Okay. Question, if you could expand on, you referenced that Canada should look at modeling its regime on Australia and the United Kingdom, I believe you said. Could you elaborate a bit more on what they're doing that you feel is better operational from a recovery perspective than we're doing in Canada?
Thank you. Well, it's not necessarily from the recovery standpoint, but it's from the initiation of the declared emergency.
Sorry,
is
that's
what
where I
they
was
have
going.
done.
Yes, when the
Right.
emergency is declared.
Right. So that the position that they created, the Secretary of State's representative for intervention, for salvage and intervention, is that one entity. It is a person or a position that has the required authority and knowledge of that flag state's response regime overall, and all of the various agencies that feed into it. And that position is able to make recommendations or have the decision-making power to cause certain things to happen in the very early days.
That does not occur in Canada now?
No, it
No, it
does
doesn't?
not at all. No, it does
Okay.
not at all. The example that's used in the expert tanker safety panel's report from Lord Donaldson's review in the UK was a vessel was in risk of sinking in the English Channel, and the single entity that I referenced took the decision to bring the vessel into a place of refuge and ground it intentionally, and that prevented massive pollution and damage to the environment by taking an early decision to bring the vessel in to and take that course of action. Otherwise, it could have foundered at sea and likely would have foundered at sea and with significant pollution.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to Mr. Butterworth. Where do you go? Mr. Butterworth, you referenced the collaboration between the province, the feds, and First Nations. You also began to identify a number of funding programs. Are you familiar with the federal government's community boat volunteer pilot program that DFO provides funding to First Nations community to buy equipment and to train to respond to emergencies? And does the provincial program collaborate with the federal program?
I'm not familiar with that program off the top of my head, but I can certainly look into that if that is useful.
Yeah, my question is because you listed a lengthy list of funding programs from the government of British Columbia that assist in this organization, and we've heard some testimony given where more funding could be provided to better equip and train, especially First Nations communities who are usually located closer to where incidents do occur and can, in a lot of cases, be the primary first responder. And this program, I believe one of our witnesses that was appeared today, that First Nations community received funding through this program. So I would like if you could provide to the committee how the BC government would collaborate with that program to ensure First Nations communities receive adequate funding to be trained and buy equipment.
So that is a fabulous question, and as I'm sure you're aware, as a civil servant, doing new collaborations and putting out funding is way above my station. We can definitely look into that and take that up through the relevant areas. We're always looking to collaborate with the federal government, and any ways that we can lever funding that's already in place, we do so. But starting a whole new funding program, that would take
this is not a new. No, this is not a new program. It's just an existing program.
No, from our side, from a provincial side. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses. And in the light of what Mrs. Langlois told us with regards to residues, invisible residues floating in our waters, this is something that is very compelling for all of us. I saw a documentary that's a few years old that was called Cargo, The Hidden Face of Freight. I'd like to speak to Mr. Hall about this. Do we have the ability to legislate or to constrain ships in our waters with regards to safety, security? I know that most are foreign flagged, but If we speak about the capacity of the ship to be seaworthy and to navigate safely, do we have any jurisdiction over this?
Thank you for the question. I think the simple answer is yes. Canada does through its signatory status to various IMO conventions and through the Canada Shipping Act and its various regulations. There is a very extensive and relatively robust regime for ensuring that vessels comply with international and Canadian regulations. That question might be fully answered by Transport Canada, but my simple short answer is yes, there is a robust regime in place.
Est-ce que ce régime, est-ce qu'on peut le vérifier?
Is it verifiable? Is there regular control by the Coast Guard?
It is verifiable, yes, but not by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has no mandate over those types of regulations. That would all be Transport Canada, but there are mechanisms built into the various codes and international regulations that call for auditing and regular inspections of the vessel and the crew.
Merci. Je sais à tout.
Thank you. I know that sometimes it's difficult to navigate the St. Lawrence and that some cargo ships are carrying oil and we have very close calls. And so this is very concerning in Quebec.
Thank you, Madam Debienne. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question's to Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, Rugged Coast Research Society is one of our former witnesses, and they spoke about the process of trying to do their best to accumulate a manifest of items that are washing ashore from the Zim Kingston because there was no manifest provided and there isn't enough information being provided ahead of time. And I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts around what you think might be helpful for a manifest to be shared with organizations when spills like this occur and what that might look like.
Thanks for the question. That's interesting. I mean, certainly all cargo ownership is very highly documented through a ship's manifest. And so I can't answer the question specifically as to why it was not shared or why it took a while to obtain that information. But that information certainly would have been in the hands of certain Canadian agencies, namely the Canadian Border Services Agency would have that information, as would the shipper itself.
Perhaps you could expand on that a little bit. This manifest that you're speaking of, how detailed is the manifest that you've seen? What level of detail do we see on that manifest?
It depends on the commodity, but they are relatively detailed. They would list if it's a hazardous good, it would indicate the UN number, what the quantity is, its point of origin, those types of details, kind of the basic information that you would expect on a product being shipped.
And if the product was not hazardous, is there a different level of information available on the manifest?
Well, the information regarding dangerous goods would not be there. Obviously, it's not a dangerous good, but quantities, volumes, whether it's a mass or dimensions, those types of things should be available.
Okay. I guess I'm thinking out loud now because one of the barriers that I've been hearing over and over is that the manifest is not detailed enough, even if it were to be provided to coastal organizations. And so these organizations, First Nations and those on the ground, are trying their best to create their own manifest to understand the items that are washing up ashore. And it makes it challenging as well for polluter responsibility without that manifest being made available to organizations. So I'm trying to understand. I think my 2.5 minutes is over, so I will stop talking. But I hope we can dig further into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Swall for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to ask the witnesses some questions here today. And I'm really excited to have Mr. Hall, a true expert in this field. Mr. Hall, we know there's increasing commercial pressure on these container ships and masters to meet very rigorous schedules.
with the increased demand and, you know, the shipping of goods and supply chain and all that. Do you think that any of that came into play in the cases in Kingston here?
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry, but though I can't actually answer that, I wouldn't have that type of knowledge on that situation. Sorry.
That's all right. Well, my next question, and I want to talk to you about, is something that you definitely do have knowledge on. So there's some pretty inexpensive EPIRBs available out there now on the market. I was just looking at one for $450, and the rate on a container from Asia or Europe is about $25,000 a day now. So is it possible that we could fit some of the containers that have volatile contents and styrofoam and whatnot simply with an EPIRB, so that we can locate them rapidly and extract them from the ocean?
Well, I would not profess to be an expert on fitting of EPIRBs to containers, but I'm sure, as I mentioned earlier, technical solutions do exist for tracking, and I think solutions can be found by the right people. Well,
I mean, EPIRBs are in all the life rafts and lifeboats, and you can even have one on your life vest if you want. So I was just thinking that that's something that we could incorporate maybe, are there ways to retrieve these containers from the ocean floor with like big electromagnets or something that we could use, and we could make this process really fast? Because wouldn't you think that's the ultimate goal here, is to mitigate the damaging effects of those containers as soon as possible?
I would agree that the ultimate goal is to mitigate the damage, of course, but I would again go back to my initial remarks that the focus should also be on preventing the incident from occurring in the first place. So let's prevent the containers from going overboard first, and then as a fallback option, if they do go over, then we clean it up. But in terms of recovering them from the seafloor, that can be a complex operation. The depth is a big determining factor, but technology does exist in industry to recover objects of difficult shapes and sizes at depth. That can be done.
Mm. So in your opinion, what would be the number one way in which we could cut down on container spills moving forward?
Respectfully, I would suggest looking at Chapter 3 of the Tanker Expert Panel's recommendations and looking at those recommendations.
Oh, I haven't had a chance to read up on that one, but if you could give us 30 seconds on that, that'd be great.
So that is the section of the report that I mentioned earlier that deals with the certain countries implementing what's called the Secretary of State's Representative for Salvage and Intervention, and that is a single authority, a single person that has overriding jurisdiction over all other national entities, with the sole focus of, or the sole mandate for taking early action, taking early decisions to prevent a marine occurrence, to prevent pollutants from ending up in the water in the first place.
Wonderful. That's all for now. Oh, go ahead. Carry on.
Shifting it from a cleanup, getting out of that reactive mentality into more of a proactive mentality. So let's prevent the goods from going over, or the ship from, say, sinking before we react. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Hall. And that's it for my questioning, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less.
Merci. Thank you for the three of you for very interesting testimony. And I think I'm going to continue on Mr. Small's prevention theme and dig a little bit. First, for Madame Langlois, very interesting testimony on the effects. And you had a number of recommendations, but I wonder if you can comment. You know, we're seeing overall high safety records of container traffic, incredibly safe, but and low proportion of container spills. On the other hand, rising container traffic and rising number of containers per ship. So I wonder, given your experience, if you can comment on the forgivability of container ships. You know, our oceans are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Our coastlines are becoming increasingly vulnerable. So is there, or should there be, a target or a forgivable number of proportion of spills? You know, even I think Mr. Zimmer's mentioned was it 0.001% crash rate, but if we compare that to civil aviation, I think that's still a few zeros behind what our forgivability is for civil aviation, commercial aviation at least, in terms of fatal crash rates. So I'm very interested in your perspective on that forgivable rate of container spills.
Yeah, thank you for the question. If I well understand, I think in terms of the impact, you know, we're kind of stuck, you know, when we work with oil spills, we know what are we dealing with, right? So we can plan for it. We know the substance, we know how it works in the water, but we can do all those modelization. But when we are here in dealing with unknowns, it's more difficult to plan or to answer very well to your questions. So perhaps the proportion of loss is not high, but then it's always a question of what did we lose. I appreciate the private companies trying to find ways to make sure that we won't be losing any of those containers, but sometimes perhaps we want to lose some. Think about waste. Recycling stuff, right? So perhaps we have to, it would be very interesting to know the statistic about what did we lose, right? So I'm not saying that we do that on purpose, but perhaps sometimes it could help to be losing some of those containers. That said, so it's really according, for example, in the St. Lawrence River, if we are dropping some containers that have some toxic substances, well, obviously the belugas are in decline. The St. Lawrence River is very, very important for Quebec and all the economy of Canada as well. So obviously the risk factor will depend of where the loss will happen, right? The last thing I would like to point out regarding this fast coordination, I've been working on oil toxicity for quite some times now with OPP and all that, and I know that in Canada we have this very well organized, the strong response oil spills in case of accident, that it's already well anchored between like the federal, the province, like it's well organized already. So perhaps can we just add one task? Could be also dealing with a potential loss of containers. That this system of coordination, it's already in place to my best of understanding.
Thank you. And to Mr. Hall, kind of on the same theme, were containers designed to be dropped overboard?
Thanks for the question. I would say no, they were not designed to be dropped overboard. They are designed though to an ISO standard. That's what makes them work around the world. So there are very rigid design standards. There would certainly be all kinds of load testing that they would need to be subject to, and all kinds of structural limitations that would be put upon them. But in terms of that specific item, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm a little bit tongue in cheek, but what I meant really was how much of the sort of the testing to withstand the depths and the possibility of spills was there, and but really moving on to some of the recommendations.
Actually, Mr. Hanley, you got about 3 seconds.
3 seconds.
You'll get in a question or an answer, and that lets it on.
Okay. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I'll go back to Mr. Butterworth, if I could. Mr. Butterworth, the province was obviously involved in this and contacted about the cleanup, I'm sure, and the potential damage to the environment. In your opinion, how could the government's response to the Zim incident have been improved? Were there lessons learned, or how could the government's response be improved?
There were definitely lessons. Oh, I'm getting a lot of feedback there. There we go. That's a little bit better. There were definitely lessons learned, and I would agree with Mr. Hall that having a stronger coordination, which would allow us to respond in a faster manner, would be very, very useful on that. And a main federal lead that has a lot of oversight for these different areas would work very, very well from our perspective. If you have a look at the way the ships come in from the open ocean on the Pacific there, they come up a fairly long, narrow channel. There's a couple of tight turns in there, and they head into the ports over there at Vancouver. The shipping is only going to get, the numbers are only going to get higher. And so the more that we can do now, it's all into that prevention and our ability to respond quickly. We need to work together to get that done, because the number of ships is going to increase. And with that, the chances of there being an unintentional release of either a container does increase too. Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned a better coordinated response. Is that a better coordinated response between the provincial and federal government, or between the volunteer organizations or the local communities? How would a better coordinated response within what organizations?
I would say more under unified command, and so having a higher level of coordination through the unified command, and making sure that there are Indigenous communities that are involved in that right off the bat, as well as the volunteer organizations. That would be a good starting point.
Okay, thank you. I'll switch back to Mr. Hall again now. Mr. Hall, you just mentioned that the key to this is preventing the containers from going overboard in the first place. Within the shipping industry and the Shipping Federation of Canada, how could the retention equipment be better handled, or is it weather conditions that are causing the problems? Can you elaborate on how we can better prevent the containers from going overboard in the first place?
Thank you. That's a great question. So whether the cause is a structural issue with the ship, or the size of the ship, or the height of the stow, or the way in which the container is secured, all of those things come into play. But all of those factors are looked at on a regular basis by the ship owner, the ship operator, and the various agencies that ensure it meets the required regulations. And even the safe operation of the ship, its safety management system, all those things are reviewed on a regular basis, on a very prescriptive legislated basis. So the reporting of incidents is one thing that is highly regulated in the marine industry now. So any shipping company would have to analyze those incidents and put preventative measures in place for preventing them in the future. So there are a number of checks and balances. Are we there yet? No, because incidents still happen, of course, but there are a number of checks and balances on the regulatory side to look at what the failures have been and take action to prevent. I'll just give you a simple example. Let's say that there was an incident on a ship, and a container went over, and the investigation by either the ship or another agency found that there was a flaw in one of the securing mechanisms. Well, you can assume quite rightly, I think, that that company would then up its inspection regime of the securing equipment to make sure that they detected any problems with that equipment in the future. Just as a very simple example.
Does
Hope
Canada
that
have
answered the question?
Does Canada have adequate input into what those standards are and the inspection methods in the shipping industry?
I think Transport Canada should answer that, but I would weigh in by saying I believe we do. Canada is very active at the IMO, where I know our country is a very strong participant, and I would estimate that yes, we are very involved in those types of regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
And thank you again, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Hall, I'm going to go back to the insurance question. Having had a little experience in the insurance industry along the way, I know those rascals don't really like to pay out money. Okay, and they will look for ways of doing things on the cheap if necessary. So, I'm just giving you that preamble so you can get your thought together on this question. Okay, there's a loss and there's debris washing up on the shore, and the insurance company knows it's going to have to help to pay for that cleanup. Are they the ones that then call the shots in terms of who's hired to do that work?
Thanks for the question. The marine insurance regime is quite complex. In a situation like that, where it's a liability issue, the protection and indemnity clubs, as they are called, would come into play, and it would be the club that ship has uses as its indemnity provider to be involved. My experience is that they do become involved, but to answer how involved they are in determining how the response is carried out, I think that question would be best answered by the marine insurance industry itself.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because we have heard from witnesses earlier on that whoever was hiring contractors to go out and do this work wouldn't necessarily hire the contractors with the best local knowledge or contractors with the connections to the various First Nations or NGOs that might be available to assist up and down the coast. And so a lot of people who had capabilities that would be very useful in the case of the Zim Kingston were not necessarily included in that effort because whoever was calling the shots maybe didn't even know they existed, much less didn't want to spend the money. So who do we talk to? Is it the marine insurance industry about all of this, or should we be cooking up a recommendation that maybe takes some of that decision making out of their hands and really allows the jurisdiction, either the regional jurisdiction or the provincial jurisdiction, to call the shots as to assigning a pre-qualified contractor to lead the effort to clean up? Is that a reasonable thing to ask for?
That's very interesting. I'm not aware of the situation that you referred to with the Zim Kingston and the perceived problems with the insurer, but I would comment that during the response phase, during the cleanup phase, when Unified Command was being stood up, that I would estimate that the actions of the ship owner through its B&I club would all be reviewed through Unified Command. So I would have estimated that the various government agencies participating in Unified Command would have been involved in that type of process. That's just my estimation.
I get the sense that the Unified Command maybe though wound up its real oversight a little too early in this process.
I'm sorry, I don't have enough information to
thank you.
Comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. We'll now go to Madame Desbiens for 2.5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Mrs. Langlois, once again. I know that I'm coming back, but if we come back to the St. Lawrence River, we know that this is important for an important source of drinking water, and there's a place where the fresh water meets the salt water, and there's all this activity. And in Saguenay, it's very important for marine mammals that come also in great numbers. In 2014, there was the Minerva. It was a huge oil tanker that went through, and since then, huge oil tankers are allowed to go. So we went from 32 or 34 meters of width to 44. And at the time, we were informed that they could only be filled 2/3 because if the number of oil was increased, they might hit the bottom of the seaway. Is the St. Lawrence Seaway in danger? Well, that's a huge a very broad issue and a broad question. The St. Lawrence Seaway, is it in danger? Well, if we're accumulating risks of spills, yes. And here we're talking about a prevention to try to make sure that there are no spills. So this is a way of mitigating the risks for the St. Lawrence. There is an increase of maritime transport. There is an increase in goods that are produced. Don't forget that goods produced are also, well, there's an increased amount of wastewater. Is the risk higher than before? Yes, because in the past we did not have as much transportation. This is self-evident. It's really the only answer I can provide. According to you, so the goal, of course, isn't to halt transportation, but don't you think allowing larger boats is going against logic? Shouldn't we allow only smaller vessels, smaller tankers? Answer. Well, of course, it depends on the quality of the ship. If they're smaller but less well-equipped, that's not helpful either. So we need to have a certain amount of security and safety. As for weight, I can't really tell you. But let me come back to this. Right now, we have a very good response plan in case of petroleum spills in the St. Lawrence Seaway. So we could use that. This already exists. And they have already a relationship with different levels of government and can respond. So we have everything to gain to give them increased authorization or increased responsibilities with cargo ships.
2.5 minutes to finish out this session.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask my last question to Mr. Butterworth. I appreciate you highlighting the importance of the prevention side here, recognizing the increased extreme weather patterns that we're going to inevitably see, as well as the increased cargo ships that we'll see moving within our waters. So I just wanted to highlight that. But I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on what you had touched on prior around the importance of funding Indigenous nations, and perhaps I'll add on to that if you didn't mention it, organizations on the ground as well. I'm wondering how you envision that looking as far as funding being allocated to nations and NGOs, and how you feel that it may support the response being more efficient when a spill does occur and may minimize the impacts on coastal communities and our marine environment.
Thanks for the question. The funding is critical. That program that was mentioned earlier, the Indigenous Community Boat Volunteer pilot program, is a capital program that has allowed some of the nations, I think there was 3 in BC, to buy a boat and some equipment. But one of the key pieces around this, as I'm sure you're aware, is training, is getting folks trained up and the ability to go out in inclement weather and be able to respond and to support the Coast Guard as and when needed. If you have a look at the volunteer organizations that do that work, they undergo a lot of training to be able to respond in all sorts of weather. So that's an absolutely key piece. Working closely together within our Indigenous partners is also key. These folks are living up and down the coast. They know the areas very, very well. They know the coastline, they know where things wash up, they know how to get to these areas. So from our perspective, as an environmental emergency response organization, they are key go-to people when we need to go into areas and look to partner to clean things up. And making sure that there is funding available for training to get folks there up to speed with what they need to know, whether it's marine or whether it's on the terrestrial environment, is a key piece. And it comes into that being able to respond quickly. It becomes into the prevention and to be able to respond in an effective manner. I know there wasn't much time left, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Your time is just over a little bit, but it is over. I want to thank the 3 witnesses that appeared before committee today for their knowledge on this particular topic. It's been insightful, I'm sure, for every member of the committee. It was one of the better testimonies, I think, of witnesses that we've had in a while. It was very informative. So we'll give a moment now for our witnesses to leave before we go into our next little bit of business.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, I think our witnesses are gone. Now, before we go in camera for drafting instructions to the analyst on this study, I understand there is a unanimous consent of all members to deal with the Standing Order 106-4 letter today. Do I have unanimous consent to continue on this item of business now? Hearing no dissension, we'll assume that's the thoughts. We'll now discuss a request that was brought to my attention from Ms. Debian. I will give her the floor to open the discussion.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you. I would like to warmly thank all the colleagues around the table for allowing me to bring forth this request. I'm going to give you the context. We did not want to arrive at this point where we had to make this request, but through this exercise of our capelin fishing, we see that weir fishing was not included, was not integrated in the process of the department and the minister and the civil servants. So in this context of weir fishing, this is a heritage fishery. There's only 2 fishers that are doing this type of fishing in all of Eastern Canada. This is a fishery that is heritage from the Indigenous peoples. They have the ability to use the resource without altering it, and so this fishery does not have a negative impact. So we have tabled scientific advice, and we have asked that the fishers be consulted. We have made representations with the minister and civil servants. You've heard the questions that I've asked in this regard before the committee when I had the opportunity to do so. So the facts are the following. This weir fishing, and I'm explaining so you'll understand, is done on the side of the St. Laurent. There's one in Ilokud and another in Charlevoix. So there's an L-shaped weir, and so when the ice melts, the capelin, well, the males die. So this weir fishing allows to collect these fish. These fish die after having reproduced. So this fishery is very popular. Everyone is waiting for capelin, and so when the capelin shows up, we know that spring is on its way, and everyone eats capelin. No one is wondering what they're going to have for dinner. Is capelin, and so that's the context. Now the issue is that each day is important for these fishers. This fishery last year, because of an inadequate date, which was May the 1st, the fishers lost over 50% of the fishery. And so this year, we've been making representations to open up this fishery earlier. Given the climate change, given the seasons that are changing as well, fishers want to be able to fish capelin when it arrives on the shore. So each day is important because capelin is fished in very small quantities because it has to be processed fresh. So you can't say, okay, it's fine, we're going to fish 3 extra tons next week. No, that's not how this works. It's very, very small quantities each and every day. And that's why it's important that the minister understand, that the civil servants need to understand how this works, and that this minister understand that this fishery is not it's not a fishery such as that in Newfoundland, that the resource in Charlevoix and the St. Lawrence has no impact at all and has no link at all with the Newfoundland resource, that fishers that we're talking about are fishing between 0.35 and 0.5% of the national capelin quota annually, and that each and every day is important. And they're ready to fish, and they're waiting for the minister's green light. And this would, they could say, okay, have a moratorium and say, yes, we're going to allow them to fish tomorrow. And they should be invited to the table to understand the situation and to make sure that in a consultation that there be a revision of the opening date of this fishery. I hope people are understanding clearly what I'm saying, and I also hope that the common sense will prevail in your consideration. I'm aware that I'm asking you to be present, ideally virtually, because I'm aware that it's a riding week, and these are very busy weeks, I know that, and I'm aware of all of that. But at the same time, I can't go to bed without making sure that I've done my very best and try to make sure that common sense will prevail, and so that this traditional fishery can be held for all the population in Charlevoix. And so this is something very emblematic for all of Quebec, and I'm sure now that you know this better, you will understand the importance of the capelin fishery. So, given this, I would invite the committee to take into account my request, and that you also take into account that my request and my request of the minister has a direct link with the mandate letter of the minister to ensure responsible fisheries, local consumption, to take care of natural resources, to not alter them. This is directly in accordance with the mandate letter of the minister. So according to 16.4 of the regulation, that the committee, according to Standing Order 182, the committee invite Joyce Murray, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, along with her officials, for a meeting of 2 hours to be held no later than April 13th, 2022, to inform the committee about the steps the department has taken on this issue since the spring of 2021 and the steps the minister plans to take, as well as the time required to correct the problem given the unique nature of weir fishing in the Charlevoix region of Quebec and in Newfoundland and Labrador. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Madame Desbiens, I open it up now to any questions or comments. Mr. Small.
Okay, so I've got a little bit of experience with fishing capelin, having landed thousands of tons of it myself as a commercial fishing captain. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, what we have is stakeholder monitoring. So there's no fixed opening date in Newfoundland and Labrador for the capelin fishery. It's simply the commercial harvesters in conjunction with the union. When the capelin show up and they're ready to take, we take them. It's pretty simple. I don't know if we really need the minister to come in for a couple of hours. We could. I mean, it's great to have her here and give her a few questions. I mean, who wouldn't want to? But just to impress upon bring some practicality into the approach, because the local harvesters know when the capelin are there, and when the capelin are there, say go. But the minister needs and the bureaucrats need to know that the timeliness of capelin, and I guess. Madame Desbiens would like to see the capelin taken after they've spawned, which is great, right? So, but the local harvesters would have that information and supply it to the bureaucrats, and we shouldn't have gatekeepers controlling this. We should just, be more practical. I support what Madame Desbiens is trying to do, and I don't think it should be that complicated, Mr. Chair.
I don't know if it's complicated or not, but I will comment on what you said about Newfoundland, Mr. Small. It's my understanding that it's a competitive fishery, in Newfoundland, that when they open it, it's DFO who decides when it closes based on what's been landed. And that always seems to be a problem with some of the fishermen in going from one area to another as the capelin progress around the island, and they're still in an area, why can't we take more, that type of thing. But it is not an individual quota basis. It's they set a maximum amount to be taken, and if one fisherman gets all that, it's done. Fishery is over, if that's correct, from my knowledge.
Yes, that's correct, but in terms of the opening, they decide to open it when the capelin are there and when they're ready for commercial use in optimum condition. And a similar decision can be made in Quebec, for sure.
All right, Mr. Serge Cormier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Madame Desbiens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Desbiens, for informing us a little bit more on this file. We briefly spoke, and I did a little bit of research in my hotel room last night, and so I'd like to clarify a few points with regards to this letter that you've sent. You're saying in the letter, first of all, that the capelin fishery in your region started on April the 1st, but in the information that I saw, this fishery always began on May the 1st, historically. Also, I think that you were speaking to some concerns, that you said that there were a lot of discussions with the DFO so that this date be moved to April the 1st, but I don't think there's any regulation that was determined. And so before deciding if the fishery can open on April the 1st, as you're asking here, Mrs. Desbiens, I think you know that we need to have a stock assessment. My information tells me that the stock assessment will be done around April the 20th. So even if we had this meeting next week, or this week even, there's very little to be done allowing this to open on April the 1st. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't want a meeting. I'm just saying that even if we did have a meeting, I don't think that we could change the decision. I think it's perhaps worthwhile to be apprised of what's happening. I don't know if you met with these fishers, but it's also worth mentioning that some of these fishers, I believe one of them received a fine because they fished too early last year. Were you aware of this? And also, were you aware of the stock assessment that would be completed around April 20th? So is this something that we could look at? Perhaps after the break? I mean, April the 1st this is already passed. Mrs.
Figure.
Oui, j'avais juste...
Yes. Yes, I would like to respond. I am aware of the offense from last year. This offense comes from the fact that our fisher, well, it's a permit that can be purchased within the family. It's a very specialized permit. So she bought the permit from her uncle, and there was no date. And so the date of May the 1st fell on us without any, well, maybe it was published on the site of the department, but people were not aware. And when you don't even have the impression that there's a date that will be set, you cannot have the instinct to go search on the DFO website to see if they set a date or not. So this was it was very unexpected. So the fishers, same as other years, the capelin arrived, they went to fish, and they began. And that is when she received the fine, and she learned that there was this date of May the 1st, and that this date was inadequate. And that is exactly when we began our undertakings to try to see what had led the department to make this decision. And we discovered that in the exercise of our representation, that May the 1st was set without any type of stock assessment being done. So what we're saying this year is that the stock assessment can be done, yes, but it's not the two weir fisheries as they're being done right now, and they have between 0.35 and 0.5% of the total quota. That's not going to change anything in the resource. So ideally, we shouldn't have to meet with the minister. If you're able to communicate with the department to explain that each day is important. Really, this is my point. Each day is important, and the 22nd, well, it's as if we were. If somebody was taking $1,000 out of your pocket each and every day, each day is important. So there's a survival aspect to this. We just need the minister to say, yes, we're going to do the stock assessment. We are aware that this is not going to change the resource. So we will do our analyses, and then we can have a consultation process with these fishers so that they can better explain the type of fishery that they do. I have no problem if you're able to guarantee that the minister is able to do this for our fishers. There won't have to have a meeting, and I would be pleased. Each and every day is important, and this is my main message here today.
Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will speak in support of Ms. Desbien's motion. There seems to be a thought within the department that fish will follow a time clock. I recall speaking to a harvester in Nova Scotia a number of years ago about the eel harvest, and DFO was trying to determine when the season should open by a date on the calendar, and the harvester's response to the question of when he thought the season should open was that it's when the neap toads start to sing. So it was weather conditions and when the eel were there to be harvested, not by a date on the calendar. And I think what Ms. Desbiens is saying here is that the fish are only there for a certain period of time. The capelin are only there for a short period of time, and to lose out on a full month of harvest because someone thought it was better for the calendar or for the entire stock in general when such a small number are harvested through this process doesn't seem to make sense. So I would support bringing the minister in and have her explain why this decision was made in the way it was, and hopefully that it could be changed to salvage a few more weeks out of the season. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Chair, and I do agree. Madame Desbiens made valid points here, but for the first time, it looks like the committee would be attempting to direct the opening of a fishery prior to the stock assessment. And the fish do migrate, they move. This is an important fishery, I'm surprised a bit, in Newfoundland. And we have no stock assessment. All the decisions are made based on the scientific data and assessment based at DFO. Often we sometimes disagree, but we also know all too well the history of politically interfering in management of fisheries without listening to the scientific and assessment data. The cod fishery collapse in Newfoundland is a classic one, where politicians kept interfering until the stock was completely collapsed, and politicians of all stripes. That's my only concern. Madame Desbiens has made some valid points, but I'd be concerned without the department's stock assessment being done, and what are the implications on the fishery? What would be the implication on the stock as it would move into other provinces for other fisheries? Because it appears to be a bit of a open free for all when the season is open. That's my only concern on attempting to move at this at this particular time, and it surprises me that we may have somebody move from one to the other, supporting this committee trying to influence the minister into moving an opening date without the stock assessment being adequately done.
Thank you to Madame Desbiens for bringing this forward. It's clear that this is an important issue to the constituents in Madame Desbiens' riding, and so I appreciate the persistence to have this issue addressed. It does feel a little unfortunate that we're here in the circumstance where we're talking about this in the manner that we are. I am in support of this motion, and I am in support of it not to supersede science, but for us to be able to have an opportunity to sit down with the minister and understand what is the process for assessment, why hasn't this assessment been done yet, what does this look like moving forward. So I think there's some good opportunities for us to ask questions around what is the delay in better understanding the concerns that are occurring in the riding of Madame Desbiens, and how do we best move forward. So I'll be in support, of course, of having an opportunity to ask the minister some questions around what's currently happening and how to best move forward, and then taking it from there.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Small next and then Mr. Perkins before going back to Madame Desbiens.
Okay, so just for the record, I support Madame Desbiens' motion. Last year, to my colleague Mr. Cormier's point on the stock assessment, the Gulf of St. Lawrence capelin stock was assessed to be very healthy. These capelin have spawned, and they will die. So their purpose in life is concluded. So it's not a fishery that's going to be damning to the stock. So I don't see the need for an assessment to have been made before proceeding with this fishery. And number three, between pinnipeds and mankind, 99 out of every 100 capelin are taken by pinnipeds. So prohibiting this fishery will do absolutely nothing to protect the resource. It'll just harm the people of the estuary of the St. Lawrence River area.
Mr. Perkins.
Hi, thank you, and thank you everyone for bearing with my hoarse COVID voice. I support the motion, and just to make sure that we're clear, I don't think anyone here is proposing that somehow this committee try and impose or some sort of solution on the minister. I think the point, as Ms. Barron put out, is for us to actually be able to question the minister and presumably some officials on why this inconsistency on how this decision-making process is being made. And it is urgent. Otherwise, we would probably include some of these discussions in the next survey, but it is urgent given that the season is imminent. And we've faced a few of these decisions by the minister in the last little while that have happened within weeks of the start of a season. So I think it's good to actually have discussion before, not after the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Desbiens.
Mais je remercie.
I thank you all for the support. I believe that the understanding of the issue is very clear, and I understand the hesitation of those who want to say that they don't want to push the minister to act before the scientists have done the stock assessment. But I would remind the committee that for 1 year now we've been waiting for scientists to do this, and we have not done anything. We have tried to obtain scientific advice. And we went high and low. We went to universities. We went in biodiversity centers for studies. We've done these work, and we've sent this to the minister. And there's an important observation. The capelin in the St. Lawrence have no link with the capelin in Newfoundland. DNA tests have been done, and the results are very clear. A capelin can travel 200 kilometers, but not 2,000. So, as the resource in the St. Lawrence, is very well delineated, and as my colleague was saying, the fish, what we want the minister to understand, it's not to push her to make a decision, but to push her rather to make the effort of understanding the technique for the fishery. This is a technique that is not using a boat. You're not using any oil, gas. It's a technique where the fish is dying in any case. It spawns and dies. And this is what the minister needs to understand. And we've tried. We've tried with her. We've tried with the deputy ministers and some scientists. But I think that the ideal situation would not be actually to meet. It would be to invite these people to go on the side of the water and to see how this fishery is actually done. You will see that there's nothing that is lost in the resource. But right now we are losing because we are altering the this heritage fishery. And I also spoke to the Minister of Heritage. So we don't want a special treatment, or that's not what we're looking for here. We just want for our fishers be able to fish next year as well. And so for this to happen on April 22nd or 25th, it's too late. Each and every day is important. These fish spawn and then die on the shore.
Go to a vote on the actual motion, but I'll read the motion out first so as everybody is fully aware what the motion says. And it states that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite Joyce Murray, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, along with her officials, for a meeting of 2 hours to be held no later than April 13th, 2022, to inform the committee about the steps the department has taken on this issue since the spring of 2021 and the steps the minister plans to take, as well as the time required to correct the problem given the unique nature of weir fishing in the Charlevoix region of Quebec and in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'll ask if there's no further discussion, we'll ask the clerk to do a recorded vote. Tina, when you're ready.
Thank you. Monsieur Cormier.
Malheureusement, non.
Mr. Hanley.
Malheureusement, no.
Mr. Hardy.
No.
Mr. Kellaway.
No.
Mr. Morrissey. Mr. Arnold.
Je vote oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Oui.
Mr. Small.
Oui.
Mr. Zimmer.
Oui. Por favor.
Madame Desbiens.
Oui.
Ms. Barron.
Merci.
I'm sorry?
Pour oui.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay, the motion is passed, approved. So we'll now take a very quick recess to switch to in-camera for drafting instructions for the additional half hour. So.
you.